Is Shin Godzilla 2 possibly happening? That's the headlines that's been going around, or it should be. A lot of people have turned this into clickbait claiming that Shin Godzilla 2 is confirmed. Let's just get into it. So, according to an article hidden behind Bloomberg's website, which you don't need to pay for, he's already a billionaire, Toho has confirmed that numerous Godzilla projects are in the works. I know, numerous. Exciting, right? While we already know that -1 Part 2 or -2 is already in the works, we already know that Monarch has a Season 2 coming out, both of those likely next year. They also announced that there's a non-specific Southeast Asia project in the works, and of course, legendary Supernova film. And then finally, a potential Shin Godzilla 2. So we're going to look at the good and the bad here, okay? First, the good. It seems like there was always a plan for a Shin Godzilla 2 despite it being cancelled. Originally, Hideaki Anno had a plan for Shin Godzilla's Counterattack. If that name sounds familiar, it's because it was inspired by the 1955 film Godzilla's Counterattack, also known as Godzilla Raids Again. Anno wanted this film to be more like Destroy All Monsters, a campy monster showdown. Toho, on the other hand, wanted the sequel to Shin Godzilla to be more serious, and so it was cancelled, or at least postponed indefinitely. That's the quick abbreviation of the story. So whenever Shin Godzilla 2 was postponed, that made way for Godzilla -1. There was always some talk behind the scenes. That's pretty much the good news. Now for the contrasting bad news. If Shin Godzilla 2 is likely to happen, what would the story be like and how would it even fit into anything? Just for a quick refresher, Shin Godzilla is part of the Shin Japan Heroes universe, which was a shared universe, not necessarily cinematically, but at least in marketing, and made by some of the same team that did Shin Godzilla. This included Shin Ultraman, Shin Kamen Rider, and the final film in the rebuild of Evangelion franchise. Now the stories in those didn't really connect, and so that leaves some wiggle room, but if they all are somewhat connected, for example, it was never quite confirmed, but it felt like Shin Ultraman was the spiritual successor to Shin Godzilla, and so to have a Shin Godzilla 2 feels like it would have to neglect some of the minor subplot details of Shin Ultraman. Putting Shin Godzilla 2 on hold created room for Godzilla -1. However, Godzilla -1 became a huge success. And so is there really a need or a way for Shin Godzilla to compete with an award-winning Godzilla -1 franchise? I believe so, but for marketing, it might not be the best strategy, unfortunately. Side note, Shin Ultraman was kind of the since Shin Ultraman was kind of the spiritual successor to Shin Godzilla, you can easily see how Shin Ultraman may have picked up elements from the Shin Godzilla's Counterattack canceled sequel plans. So if you ever wanted to know what Shin Godzilla's Counterattack was going to be like, just watch Shin Ultraman. That's probably the closest thing we'll ever have to it. So with this talk that Shin Godzilla 2 may be happening, it's a good sign that we're getting a true, darker sequel, at least possibly. But the skeptic in me is more concerned that this is just a marketing ploy. It's hype being built up for the upcoming re-release of Shin Godzilla 2016, now in 4K. It'll be hitting movie theaters on August 14th. Toho definitely wants to cash in on the hype of Godzilla -1. And since Shin Godzilla is very recent, very underrated, and very similar in tone, what better way to do a money grab than to rehash this release? But to end on a good note, if this ends up being a successful re-release, it may genuinely convince Toho to do a Shin Godzilla 2. If there's ever another chance for a Shin Godzilla 2, now is it. If it doesn't happen now, it probably never will. Now, even if they greenlight it, it's still going to be a few years out. We'll probably get Godzilla -1 first. Godzilla will have to go on hold for Hollywood to do their shenanigans with their Michael Bay Godzilla franchise. Not actually Michael Bay, but it just feels like the Transformers movies starring Godzilla. So if there is a Shin Godzilla 2, I wouldn't expect it before 2028 for legal reasons. But that's actually why I made this video. I want to add to the hype. I plan on seeing the Shin Godzilla re-release. -1 may be a better movie, but that's not to say that Shin Godzilla isn't a good Godzilla movie. It's actually my favorite Godzilla because it reinvented Godzilla and made him fresh. Sadly, it's unlikely that Toho will be able to keep 3, maybe even 4 different Godzilla universes afloat all at once. You would have the Shin Godzilla universe, the -1 universe, the Southeast Asia universe, and then the MonsterVerse universe. At some point, I feel like Toho needs to compress some of this. Several years ago, they did announce plans for a shared cinematic universe. And so far, all we've got is standalone Godzilla films. So maybe if they can somehow condense these universes, is there a way to put Godzilla Minus One and Shin Godzilla in the same universe? Just separate them by time in a cover-up story? Perhaps the government tried to hide Godzilla Minus One? I still want to see a Godzilla versus Godzilla film. Just two different Godzillas. Should Shin Godzilla ignore the rest of the Shin Heroes universe? Should Shin Godzilla ignore the rest of the Shin Japan Heroes universe? Should it just be its own standalone thing, not connected to anything else? We should hear more about this at Comic-Con coming up, or just sometime throughout the year. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. Thanks for watching.